Coming up in today's episode, we start pulling the roof off the boat to get into the wiring, things get technical with 3D printing, and my camera thinks it's Superman. So as you might have seen on my boat tour video, I mentioned that 2 of the dials don't work anymore on the old navigational interface. So what we've done is we've taken it out of the boat. Here it is. I'm going to save us a bit of trouble here and explain that after about 3 hours of stripping apart this wooden monstrosity, I got nowhere closer to figuring out what to do next. So I decided instead to go from the power of the boat and go from there rather than try and work backwards. So we'll skip this entire nighttime segment and just go straight to the next part on the boat. We'll just call it 3 hours of learning what not to do. Okay, so things have moved on a little bit from the kitchen table. With this absolute mess. So I thought I'd go back to basics first, so I took the power unit coming in, because it's old cable I spliced it into modern 5-core cable using soldering and heat shrink tubing to make it effectively one long tube, one continuous cable. I've then brought that to the boat, plugged it in to these little boat housings, and it turns out that the power source is not drawing enough to actually power the units now. Whether that's just old cabling or what, I don't know, but when I hook the devices up to a straight 12-volt connection, they work fine. So we decided that the best thing we can do is scrap pretty much most of this, because we don't really need it anyway. So if we look at it, we look at the unit itself. So this is my depth gauge. I need this. However, what we found out is that this does not work when powered by the official cable that was in the boat. This is for the new Windy, because we discovered that the Windy unit was knackered, and or the cabling going through to the wind speed at the top was knackered. So it's now here. And I've already replaced that, but we'll still do that in a second. This is a speaker which is blown out and useless. This, I believe, is a slave to this unit, which has already shown me depth and stuff. So I don't actually need it, because I've got depth on this, so why do I need it on this? It does also give me GPS, but I'll be using a chart plotter and stuff anyway, so I don't need it. And this is a log that doesn't read. So essentially, I don't need any of that. I only need these 2. So the new plan is to just do those 2. I can 3D print a new housing to go on the boat with just those 2 in it, and I'll run new power cabling through the boat, which I've already begun. So have a look at this. Now, it's a bit of a mess, but this is how I was testing stuff. So this boat has got a 12-volt female connector already in and wired, and it works. I've tested it with other devices such as this one here, and we can see that when it's plugged in we get a red light, so it's working. So we took that, we wired it up, we bought a bit of power cable, and we just went through redundancy testing that all my devices worked. So we wired that in, wired it into this, it turns on and works. Wired it into the new wind receptacle, it works. So we know that the power will work, but we know that the one that's currently in here, which is up here somewhere, is knackered. So I'm in the process of rewiring a new cable up to the top. I first thought I'd go to the back of the switchboard and pull a 12-volt out of that. However, this is now obviously full of all the old cabling, which I don't really understand, because it's not modern. So that's out of the question. That's going to get code back over and go back in. So the next option is, we know there's a 12-volt coming into this to power this unit. So if I take a feed off of that, I can then, and it's on the same circuit on the breaker as the stuff up top, then we can take a feed off of that, wire it through, wire it up, wire it in, and then through here using a cable flange, and then we can have the next lot of wire up the top for the devices. Here's cable flange. So we put a new seal in with a new cable. Option 2 is we do all of that still again with the wiring, but we leave it with that. And we just plug it straight into the 12 volt, and then I get to decide when it works and when it doesn't. I've also got a 12 volt splitter with switches, so as a secondary I could use that as a switch when I want to turn the instruments on and off, but effectively when I'm sailing I'll be using the instruments anyway. This chart plotter, for instance, is already plugged in to the same unit, so why not? That might be another option. So yeah, we'll carry on stripping the boat about and trying to wire it up and see how it goes. Whew. So this is a boat flange. I've taken out the plastic inner. This goes around the cable and stops any water ingress into the boat. But before I decide what to do down below with the wiring, it's probably best to know where I'm wiring to. So my plan is to stick this as far into here as possible out of the way, because when I make the new electric unit it's going to sit here, so I'm going to have a little cable coming up and into the back of the unit here. I can't put this up here because of the way the boat's built. It's not actually part of the same hull. This is actually a second piece put on top, so I've only really got this side or the other side to do it on, and this is the side that's got all the electric cabling below me, so this makes the most sense. So we're going to start by placing this somewhere that it's still free enough that it's not being squished, which is going to be about there. Any more up there and I'm now getting pressure on the side here, so it's not sitting flush. I need the watertight seal, so it comes with a little sticky seal here at the bottom. So about there is probably the right place. It comes in several parts, so we're going to stick down the seal, then screw in the base bit, then I can drill the hole for the cable to go in, and then we can put the seal and stuff on top when the cable comes through. Sorted. Okay, what you're seeing now is me struggling to screw in the fiberglass. At the time I wasn't aware that you shouldn't do it. I've since learned that you shouldn't anyway, so we'll come back to this later when I do it properly with some nuts and bolts and get it all properly sorted. Anyway, learning curve, moving on. Right, so success. The cable comes out of here, in through this hole, underneath where we've taken the top off, up through the fiberglass hole to holes drilled in this corner here. They'll then feed up through here. This line here is where the ceiling panel comes on, so they've now gone underneath the ceiling through one support beam across to the hole that's been drilled, which links up to where the flange will be at the top. We've left enough there for the devices, so now we just got to put and tidy all this away and put the ceiling back on. Now for the moment of truth. There's the cable we've wired through to the depth sounder, and there's the other cable we've wired through going to the wind meter. So we're still testing it using 12 volt. So these two need to go together. Red light comes on. Ah yeah. Depth gauge is working, showing 4.5, 4.95. Tide must be in. And the wind reader is loading because I've just installed the Wi-Fi unit at the top of the mast. Please work. There we go, it takes a little while, and I haven't set yet the wind on it, so it doesn't know which way's dead ahead yet. That's part of the orientation once we go out on the boat, but apparently it's blowing at about 7 knots of wind. Although it does say it's coming from my stern port quarter, and according to the other boats nearby, it is. So it's probably not too far off. Nice. So that's all wired in. Well, no, it's not wired in. It is plumbed in. It's not made safe and sound yet. But we now know that all the wiring that I've done so far works. We've got power and we've got devices that are working and receiving as required. So now it's just a case of making it look neat and wiring it up better so it's not on a 12 volt car socket. Although at least now I know that if I have a worst case scenario, that can now be a redundancy, so that's good. Right, let's unwire this again take these 2 blocks off. Then I can take this part home with me again, scrap these 3 at the back, and 3D print some form of surround to put these 2 in. Then I got to figure out a way of fixing it to the boat, because currently on this one, you see these silly little clasps here on the side? They're designed to go here on these clutches here. So I'm going to have to think of something else to attach to the boat. Maybe I can use those. Not really sure yet. Or I can just glue it to the boat. Although I want something that's temporary, so I'm not really sure. That'll be on the design stage on the print. So let's take this apart and then we'll head back into the office. Right, so now we're back home. I've taken the unit out of the wooden housing. I'm going to use tape measure to measure the back to know how much of a hole I need to make in my design to fit these into it. And we're going to go over to 3D print software. And first of all, I've got to design it, so we'll have a little play around and see what we come up with. Okay, so the prototype is done. Have a look. Here's the main box with the hole for the 2 units. Here's the back plate, and here's the handle. It's got a little R on it, so I know that goes in this one here. The back of it is open for the 2 panels to go in, and it's got the curve on to sit on the boat. This should sit nicely inside like that, and there's a little handle there to go on there. There we go. And the little central hole there is big enough for the coaxial cable to go through, but not so big that there should be any water coming through. So this is too big for my printer, so I have to cut it up and then put it on the printer. So I'll bring it back once it's printed and show you the prototype, hopefully in my hand. Let's go. So installing a new windy also meant going up the mast and installing a new receiver. So thankfully 2 of my friends from the marina came along and gave me a hand, and they started to sweep me up the mast. We discovered a slight problem in my boat in that the winches were good enough to hold on to me and bear my weight, but not good enough to winch me up the mast, which then meant that I had to do most of it myself by climbing. And you can hear just how tiring that is. I also lost the camera halfway up the mount, and miraculously it landed and pointed upwards, so it still kept giving me shots. So we've climbed the mast to change this old wired one in for the wireless. Now I've dropped my GoPro, so I'll put the camera down and put the new one in. We've taken rid of the old one. The white plug's left. I'll put the cap back on. That'll run through the mast and just leave the cable there. I don't care about it because this is wireless. Okay, gentlemen, we're about ready. Okay, so here we are. We've made it. It's 3D printed. I've painted it red to match the boat, and it's basically a 2-screen version of the wood one. It's fundamentally a box, so on the back of it I printed a little backing plate with a handle that you can pull off. There's a hole in the middle there, which is big enough to take the coax cable for the back of the depth sounder, and the wiring that's already in the boat will fit through there. I'll do the wiring in the back of here. We can then tidy it all neatly away. This will then get put on. I'm probably going to seal that just with some tape because it'll be waterproof then as well. And that's it. We'll stick it onto the boat. I've put the curve in the bottom to mimic the one that was on the wood, so it should hopefully sit on top of the boat, and there we have both the gauges I'm going to use in one unit. So let's take it down to the boat and see how it looks. Okay, so we're back on the boat and we've now got the new panel installed. As you can see, it's a little different than when I ended the last clip. So I installed a phone mount for my chart plotter because it runs as a slave onto a phone, so I've placed that on there so I can see on here. This moves as well, so I can adjust it. I'm gonna be honest, I thought I had more clearance when I was designing this, so it's a little bit too high for my liking. I put a USB charger on the top there, although I now think maybe I need to put it here so I can actually access it. Like I said, this is a prototype version, so I might redo it again and make it slightly smaller, but for the moment we've just test wired it all back in, so let's see if it works. We'll just flick the switches on and flick them on and hope that it works. Test it on there. Well, they've started up okay. Depth gauge is working good. And wind reader is reading perfect, so that's working. There's a blue light coming from the USB charger, so that's working. So all in all, works perfectly. Because it is a prototype, I'm not going to stick it down. You can see here, I've got sticky foam ready on the bottom. The curve sits quite nice from what I took from the design, so it does sit quite well there. My only concern is that it's touching on the back here by the plastic, so maybe I'll make it a little shorter on another version to try and get it to sit down a little bit. But what I have done is I've also printed these little bits on the side with the idea that I was going to tie them to these previous clips here. That's the radio. Can't find GPS. There we go. What was I saying? Oh yeah, so with those little ties there, I'm going to hold it down for the moment, hold it in place, then get this wiring sorted and tidied away, and then it'll be done. Right, let's take that apart and put everything back together. So here's the cable flange I'm going to be using to secure the hole going through the boat. Now, I've already tried to drill the holes and screw in the cable flange because the packet just said screw to boat. The packet lied. It turns out that, and I've learned since, that screwing into fiberglass is not a good idea. The screws just spun and took no purchase. So what I'm going to have to do is take this down again and bolt it through. Now I've got some countersunk bolts and that, so it will work fine. But it just means I've got to take the sealing off again. Which isn't too bad a job, which is annoying. So we'll do that now. Okay, so now we can see there's the hole where the cables that I ran earlier in the week through. They go down, down, and we'll worry about that in later. But for now, we need to get this bit secured into the cable flange. So now let's drill those bolts through and just make sure there's nothing else that's going to hit. No, that's good. Just the own cables, so I've got to watch out for those. Okay, so now we've got our little holes. I need to use the bolts. It didn't come with them, so I've bought some countersunk bolts to go with it. The actual unit itself comes in several parts. So the outer side is this plastic thing here. This is actually in two halves. So we've got the outer side that's got the screws on, and then the inner shell, if it comes apart, come on, is what you bolt to the boat. There's another 3 holes there for what I'm now about to put in, which are these countersunk holes. So that goes on the boat first with the foam seal already underneath it. Screw that on, and then you put that one on top. What goes in the middle? What goes in the middle depends entirely on cable size. So it comes with these 4 different washers. They've got different size holes in them, and they split open. They do split open. There we go. So in the case of what I'm using, I'm going to be using the largest one, which I've just dropped in the kettle, because I've also got 3 cables going through this. It's meant mainly for 1 cable, but what it does give me is a blank option should I want to, if I ever get rid of the cables, or more importantly, if I drill it myself to the size that I need. But I'm hoping that this should do the one that I'm using. So first we're going to bolt this on, and then we're going to mess around with the rest. Okay, here's the harder part. I have to tighten these up from below and above. So on with the trusty multi-tool to hold the bottom, and then I'm trying guesswork from above, or maybe I'll look from above and guess from the bottom. So what I thought I'd also do, at the point where these cables come through the gasket at the flange or whatever, I'm going to shrink wrap tube. I forgot what they're called. Heat shrink tube. That area, so it's only one cable coming through, rather than the 3 strands I've got at the moment, as that might allow some seepage. So I'm hoping if I make it one, it'll be better. So let's do that. Yeah, look at this. That's a much better seal. See how it's only got one cable to go around, whereas if I put it up here, the split cables create holes in the actual housing there, so water would still seep through. But by heat shrinking the bottom, see that? There's barely anything at all. Cool. Let's try and screw that on. That is now fully sealed. Even around the back there. Looks pretty good. That's what I could probably put some wussy on top just to be sure, but I'm quite happy with that. Nice. So, that is everything installed. We've got the flange installed, covering the cables, so water going through the boat. We've got the cables coming through, which are now covered in heat shrink material, going to the back into the unit, powering it on, and that's it done. I'll fix it down to these little screws there, and obviously there's my foam mount for the slave from the chart plotter down there. So now everything is done up here. You'll see that I've now tied it on as well. Let's finish up tidying down below. So I'll put the ceiling back on and then figure out what I'm doing with the wiring. Okay, so currently all those devices are powered by this. It's a 12-volt insert. I've just wired them on for the moment so I can test it all out. And if we stick it into this 12-volt here, you'll see that it lights up and they start working. My plan is to hardwire it into the boat, but because I've already looked at the switchboard and it's a nightmare, my plan is to find the existing feed in the back of this panel, which has got radio in, the GPS auto helm device here, log stuff. I never look at it, but it's in the boat. But it's also got a 12-volt normal socket here, so this could go into here. But that would still mean another weak link in between. But this 12-volt here goes into the back of a block. So I'm thinking if I can take a feed off of that, it will feed the devices and they'll be on the same circuit loop as this 12-volt and the radio. And obviously I'll have the radio on anyway when I'm using them, so there's no real negative there, I don't think. So we're going to take the panel off, get to what we need, screw it all in, and hopefully it'll work. You can see it right in there. There's a block there with the brown and blue going off into this 12-volt. So my plan is to add these into that block and take the power. Okay, so after much deliberating, we have now attached the power cables from the windy receiver, which is here, and the power cable from the depth sounder above, which obviously I ran through the ceiling and everything, into the back of here. It's connected up into the same circuit as the 12-volt, using the connector blocks that were at the back. So pop that back in, lock that off. So now it's gone from being on the same ring as the other instruments as being on the ring with the radio and the 12-volt, but never mind, I still want to switch in the panel. So put them in. Let's see if it works. The 12-volt switch is now this one down here, so I'll flick it on. The radio is on, which should mean I've got power to the receiver. I've got power on the Wi-Fi and power on both of the devices. Full disclosure, I went back shortly afterwards after some more testing and put them back on the original circuit they were on before, on the same ring as they were on before, so that the load bearing through that ring and its amp drawage, whatever,
load on there was the same as what was before, and so I didn't put any extra load on the other 12-volt ring that was already wired in and working perfectly fine. And now it works perfectly anyway, so lessons learned.
Everything is installed, everything is wired in, and bar a bit of tidying up, we're all done. Awesome. So all in all, really happy with how this has turned out. I'm probably going to reprint it, make it slightly smaller. I'm not too keen on two little bits touching here on the back on the plastic, and I'll probably move that and move that again, so the next one will have these closer together, allowing these side bits to be open, and I'll put the USB there and I'll put the phone mount there so it goes out to about here on the side, I think. But other than that, I'd say that's successful. I now have a working depth gauge and wind reader, which at the start of this video, or 2 parts if I've made this 2 parts, I didn't. So now we can move on to the next boat job, which will be in another video, or maybe I'll actually get out and do some sailing soon. So thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please comment below, like the video, subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more boat stuff coming now that I've got Santana. Until we see you on the next one, take care and we'll see you again. Goodbye.